you are reading something that I'm guessing, if you got the Seamus Heaney translation, looked really weird if you looked at it on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
So let's take a peek at that. If you don't have a copy of Beowulf, grab one from up here or let me know. And let's just open to the very first page, which is 2 and 3, looking something like this. I'm guessing when you picked up Beowulf, your initial thought was, oh, I gotta read this whole thing. Then you opened it, you looked at the left-hand page and you thought, oh, I gotta read this whole thing and I can't even read it. Then you looked at the right-hand side and you said, oh, I can read that. And then I'm guessing, for some of you, 30 seconds later, for some of you, 5 minutes later, for some of you, an hour later, you realized this was actually a translation of what was over here.
I read it all.
Okay, before you realized that? Okay, so some of you maybe even later than that.
I still don't get it.
The point is this. Over here, you have something that doesn't look remotely like English, but actually is English. Something that we call, in our amazing ability to develop terminology, Old English. There you have it.
Some people call it Anglo-Saxon
Yeah.
as a language.
Oh, perhaps they do, yes. So here's the deal, people. We are looking at a time period far removed from our own, but yet still considered English. Now, if we attempted, everyone around the room attempted to read this, it'd be fascinating, so let's try it. Ola, line 1.
Oh God. What we Gardena in Geardagum.
That was really good. Did you look that up online? You looked it up online, didn't you?
What?
You listened to a recording of Beowulf in Old English.
And I was very impressed.
Okay, hold on. I've asked many students to do this over time, and no one's ever done it correctly before.
Wait, really?
Does
Yeah.
Old English have some resemblance to English?
Shut up. It's not slow.
Let me point this out, okay? First of all, she said it correctly, so well done.
Wait, say it again.
Did I really?
Yes, you did. Try it again.
Quashmi Yardina?
What we Gardena in Gardagum.
Okay, that wasn't as good the second time. The first time was good. Basically, she pronounced everything phonetically, because that's what we do in English. We sound things out. And so you have this HW, the hwa, sounds like you're hopping something up. Okay? What we, you can see that it's long. Hui, and then Gardena. So you have a language very, very strange and almost guttural. Kind of makes you think of what? Language. Kind of harsh and guttural.
German.
Kind of like German, right? And so very much Old English is really more or less a branch of German. Okay, so we have to go way back here in terms of our studies. Julius Caesar, maybe? Anyone know what year Caesar died?
200 million.
Okay, let's go back even before Caesar. Forget Caesar. Let's go back to the golden age of the Greek Empire. Let's go back to what we call 5th century Athens. Let's go back to Sophocles, Euripides. What time period? If it's 5th century Athens, it's not 500 AD, it's 500 what? 500 BC. Birthplace of what?
Philosophy.
Philosophy is the biggest thing. And who is our most significant philosopher from this time period?
Socrates.
Yes, indeed.
While on the topic of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
While on the topic, nicely done. Okay, so Socrates we would know nothing about if not for his pupil who wrote everything down by the name of Plato. Which by the way is kind of interesting because we don't actually know that anything that we know about Socrates is actually true. Because it's a guy named Plato who was his pupil writing everything down. How many times have you, either incorrectly or just kind of for fun, said something that wasn't actually true that you heard told?
Misquoted all the time.
Virtually. And so the point is, we don't exactly know, so it always cracks me up when people are like, let's have a Socratic seminar. We don't even really know that Socrates was into that method of learning, but nonetheless, these are our important philosophers from the time period. Birthplace of philosophy, birthplace of what else? Theater. Specifically through 3 famous playwrights. Can you name 2 of them? Yes. Good. The first one is the most famous. He's the writer of Oedipus the King, Oedipus the Colonist, and Antigone.
Not him, Sophocles.
Sophocles, most famous playwright. Sophocles actually is not the first playwright. Aristophanes comes after Sophocles.
What?
And he's way down here. We're not even going to put him up here because he's a writer of comedies. Famous, yes. Good, yes. But I'm looking for the 3 tragic playwrights. Yes. It looks really kind of weird when you spell it out. It's pronounced Aeschylus. I've heard that some people pronounce it Aeschylus, but we won't go there. So, Aeschylus.
Less than joke in our class.
Yes. Sophocles, Aeschylus, and your third one, his name is
Euripides.
Very good. Okay, you got a birthplace of theater, you got a birthplace of philosophy, you got a birthplace of democracy. I mean, this is huge. This is the golden age. This is where so much of what we love, what we cherish, what we hold true to ourselves comes from. Okay, 500 BC. Let's make a timeline here. This will be a little easier. Obviously, the Greek Empire does not last into the AD time because it's basically swallowed up by what empire? So we go Greek as a stronghold, which really for the Greek Empire, you look at 500 BC as its height. Then you get into the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is quite spectacular, as you know, starting in BC, really even going to 33, 50 BC, and then all the way forward until Rome falls. Can anyone tell me roughly what year Rome falls?
What was that, 280?
Crumbles. Not 280, you gotta go even farther.
200.
Okay, think about it from this perspective. What is Rome up until the death of Julius Caesar?
Awesome.
It is awesome. It is awesome. Because what is it? What type of governmental system?
Democracy.
Yes. Specifically though, you choose the people and the people represent you.
Republic.
A republic. Rome is a republic until the death of Caesar. What happens after the death of Caesar?
Dictatorship.
Not a dictatorship, but it's similar to that. What do we call it? The Roman Empire. And who was the first Roman emperor? Augustus. How was he related to Caesar?
Well, adopted.
Adopted son. Okay, more or less nephew, but adopted son. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and this also goes back to 10th grade. When Julius Caesar was killed by the conspirators, what was their reason for killing him?
He was getting too powerful.
And what were they worried was going to happen?
It would be a dictatorship.
It'd be a dictatorship, he'd become an emperor, a ruler, the republic would fall. They kill him, and what happens? The republic falls.
No.
That is the horrible, tragic irony at the center of the Roman Republic. They try to preserve the republic. Their attempts to preserve the republic cause the republic to fall into the empire. Now, in the scope of history, this is actually not a bad thing. The Roman Empire becomes strong. It encompasses much of the known world at the time. It's massive, and its rulers are quite powerful. All the way up until, and I'm going to give you a time that's not exactly accurate, but it's a lot easier to remember. The accurate time is roughly 420 AD. I'm going to call it,
You think that's hard to remember?
I was going to call it 500, because it's nice and round. And
No.
because you're looking
We
for
can keep
420
it
is definitely
420.
It's gonna be very.
420 is extremely memorable.
Are you not with us on this?
I'm really kind of thinking that
Smoke weed
Yeah.
every day.
420 plays it.
I don't know why you would want to
It's the
smoke
stoner holiday.
dandelions.
Every. You've been
Listen,
smoking
I know you had that
dandelions.
one.
I thought I didn't realize it was a specific type of weed. I thought it was any weed.
No.
So I was weeding the garden,
No.
and I tossed it in the
Weeding?
fire,
You're like, I'm
And
starting
I
to
stood
feel
over
it.
it.
I'm starting to feel it.
and then there was a banjo, and so I started playing it,
I passed out.
and I was talking about philosophy with people, but it didn't really. I didn't really know what.
Hey, can we watch the scene where the conspirators stabbed
Quite
Julius Caesar?
possibly. However, I'm going to give you 500 now, especially because of your little antics.
Oh, I'm putting 420 down.
Yeah, your
You can't
antics.
stop me.
Okay, your antics.
It's accurate too, so.
Well, here's the other thing. No one really knows exactly when an empire falls. It's not like there's a specific day. But by 500 AD, you can realistically say that Rome had essentially left all of its areas. It was done. And one of its primary areas that it was occupying was, of course, England, which was called during this time period what? I am Arthur, king of the...
Round table.
I rule this table. The Britons, Britannia, right? Britain. Okay, so think of it from this perspective. Rome rules the world. Rome falls. Rome leaves all of its regions, including England. You have essentially an evacuated region. You have an empty parcel of land. It just so happens that you have a bunch of what you might say
Germanic tribes.
You might say, I was going to say brutes and Vikings and savages, but we could call them Germanic tribes, because that's probably what we would say, right? Basically, you have this beautiful land, and you have three specific groups of people who move in. By the way, that's a euphemism for invade, okay? We like to say they settled. They decided to set up shop in. No, they came in raping and pillaging, okay? But that's what we do. That's what Germanic tribes do, okay? I don't know what else to say that.
Why did
The
you
fact
say
is,
so we do?
well, because ultimately, we all are descendants from this in some way. In some way, shape, or form.
That doesn't mean that we rape and pillage.
In our baser sense.
Is this the same philosophy that we're all brothers and sisters because we all came from Adam and Eve?
Not necessarily, although the speaker of Beowulf would say that. The point is this, you've got three distinct tribes who basically invade and settle Britain. And they are, we've already said these earlier.
Franks.
Not yet.
Anglo-Saxons.
The Spear Danes.
The Angles,
Angles.
the Saxons, and then the group that no one remembers. They kind of got left out in the naming process. They were basically like, hey, let's name this place like Anglo-Saxon. And the third group's like, that sounds great. And then they're like, wait a minute, we got left out. They were and I'm gonna spell this out for you. The Jutes. These three tribes invade England. They set up shop. Okay, now, go back for just a moment. Why do we remember Rome so much?
It was the largest empire.
The largest empire, number one. What were some of the accomplishments of the Roman Empire?
Aqueducts.
That's huge, okay?
I know.
Basically, we have indoor plumbing. We have the Romans to thank for that, okay? Any sort of network within a city, even electric, any aspect of a city construction really goes back to a Roman idea. When they had roads, they had aqueducts, they had what?
Arches.
Arches. Where did McDonald's be?
Roman columns. I love
Yes,
those.
yes. So if you have those in your house, on in front of your house, you can look at that and say, thank you, Rome. Thank you, Caesar, for dying and bringing us these wonderful things. I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say that these Germanic tribes probably weren't that interested in aqueducts, in building colosseums, in
Yeah, their water
huge
froze.
structures. What were they interested in?
Meat.
Raping and pillaging.
Raping and pillaging, meat. They were interested in things very, very much of a temporary nature. And they built in materials of temporary nature. And instead of building in stone, instead of using masonry, what did they use?
Sticks.
Wood and sticks and mud. And this is why virtually none of what they built still exists today. Whereas with Rome, I mean, look at all that we still have, all from the Greek time period, all from a Roman time period, from the Germanic tribes. You might look at like a pile of mud and be like, here is where Shield Mongonga. So obviously, I don't know. The point is this, these three tribes come in, Germanic origin, they set up shop, and really, from roughly 500 AD, for 1,000 years, life goes on as normal in this rather dim, dismal, not brightly lit age.
Dark age.
Ah, yes indeed. Now, again, I'm giving you round years, and I'm doing that honestly because 10 to 15 years from now, I think it will be easier to remember round years than anything else. We could say, 1480, we could say any number of specific time periods, but the fact is this. From 500 AD to 1500 AD, which is roughly 1,000 years, this was considered the Middle Ages. Known in lore as the Dark Ages. This was considered the time period where, honestly, not much culture was made. What was made were a lot of babies, and a lot of animals were killed, and, there were some things like the Crusades. There were a lot of crazy religious things going on, and things like the 100 Years' War, the Black Plague, all that lovely stuff. Not really a lot of theater, plays, literature, not like you would have with Greece, not like you would have with Rome. Until 1500 AD, what happens? Ta-da! Someone finds a light bulb, turns it on, and you have a rebirth. You have the Renaissance. The Renaissance comes along in 1500 AD, and it means, its actual translation is rebirth. Rebirth of what?
Culture.
Culture, and specifically rebirth of culture from what time period? And really, technically you would look at it as a rebirth of culture from the Greeks and Romans, but actually in the Renaissance they mostly only had access to Roman materials. They didn't have the translations of Greek and all of that. Shakespeare most likely never read Sophocles and Euripides, but they were well versed in their Latin. So it's a rebirth of this culture that for 1,000 years had been dead, more or less. And then after the Renaissance, you have time periods like the Restoration, the Enlightenment, all the way up to the discovery of the New World, so to speak. And then you have American literature at its birth, and then that brings us all the way up to speed in the year 2000. So, most of what we are going to be studying in this class is written between 1500 and 2000. 500 years in our timeline. But this is ultimately a survey of British literature. And it would be kind of sad for us to skip over this entire 1,000 years if we didn't at least touch upon some of the highlights. And I'll be honest with you, there's really only 2 highlights when it comes to literature from this time period. When you read the literature here, there are hundreds of things to read. Here, there's 2. You want to guess what they are? Brilliant. There you have it.
Canterbury Tales counts as one?
It does. And here's how we look at this. Old English is going to be roughly 500 of this 1,000 years. Something happens right in the middle of this timeline. Right, almost virtually in the middle. Something happens that changes the language, that causes a cultural shift in the language. Old English, which is what Beowulf was composed in, goes all the way up until an exact date of 1066. We have an exact date on this because something very significant happened in 1066 in England. It involves a certain conqueror, who I call Billy, but others call
George.
Frank, more or less. It's William the Conqueror, right? William the Conqueror invades and brings what influence to England?
Danish. No.
Obviously.
Obviously what?
Obviously it's German.
No, it's not German.
Obviously it's
Okay, well,
Latin and
okay, so French.
I already said French.
You said German.
Yeah, before it I said French.
Right.
I thought you were talking about kissing. I didn't
You
know
can
where
check
you
the
were
video.
going. So, yeah, we're going back and look.
You said that after I said how are you doing?
I don't know what's happening. The point is this. 1066, William the Conqueror invades. He brings a French influence. Now, consider this for just a moment. You have the Angles, you have the Saxons, you have the Jutes. You have Germanic influence. You have a very like, hua, where, hua, hua, hua kind of language. That's really what it is, okay? You can read it yourself in Beowulf. The French come in.
We
Silly. Knickets.
Middle
Right.
English sounds like Irish.
And so when you have French plus these Germanic tribes, you get what becomes Middle English. And if we look at Middle English, which we're going to do shortly, you'll discover that you can actually read it. It starts to make sense. It's still a little strange, but it starts to make sense because our language, people, comes from German and French. A lot of people think that we have Latin to owe for all of our language. We have Latin to thank for some of our words, but not for our language. Our language is a Germanic language with French influence. 1066, William the Conqueror invades, brings in the middle time period, and this brings us all the way up to the Renaissance in 1500 AD. Yeah. you, sir?
Perfect. Why does it look like you're eating your kid?
Take a bite, sweet.
Okay, let's back up for just a moment. I want you to reopen up at least to the page of Beowulf, and I want you to listen to what this sounds like. Much in the same way that we heard Ola just say it. This is a guy named Michael Drought, and he actually has a 3 CD set, don't ask why, of him reading all of Beowulf. This is one piece of it. I don't, but boy would I be tempted to get it.
They don't
Would that be
technically
like
know
your
how to
first
say
gift?
it though, so we don't know if this is completely
We
awful.
don't, but he says it with such confidence. that it's good. Now just check this out, try to follow along as he does this.
What? Wegar dena in Yrdagum, Ferod Kuninga, Thrimja Frunan, Hutha Athlingas, Ellen Fremedan. Off shield chafing, Shiadana Triatum, Modigum Maitum, Medo Sedla Oftech. Exo de Erla Sitan Erest Werth, Veasjaft Funden, Hitas Frofra Jebed, Werks under Wolknem, Werth Mundum Thach. That him I whilch Setendra over Ronrada, Huran Shoulder, Gomban Guldan. That was God Kunning.
That's my favorite part. That was God Kunning. And if you look at the translation on the other side, that was a good king.
It was one good king.
That was one good king. Now here's the thing. You have just read a massive list of accomplishments. Absolutely massive. Now, consider, if someone says this about you, they're introducing you, you're a guest speaker at some sort of banquet, and you get up there, and they say, there was Alec Bednar, scourge of many tribes, a wrecker of mead benches, rampaging among foes. The terror of the hall troops had come far, a foundling to start with. He would flourish later on as his powers waxed and his worth was proved. In the end, each clan on the outlying coast beyond the Whale Road had to yield to him and begin to pay tribute. And then I said, that was one good guy. What would you think about the description, good guy?
That you were a descendant of his.
No, if I say he was a good guy, after I just listed pretty outstanding qualifications. It's an understatement. What should I say?
He was the best guy.
Yes, Alec, I should say that. I'm thinking more like, this dude's freaking awesome. Okay? He's a wrecker of mead benches. You know what a mead bench is?
Bench that you sit in the bar.
You basically picture a huge long table where 20 to 30 burly men would sit. Picture a bench they would sit on to sit at the table, drinking mead. Do anyone know what mead is?
Ale-ish.
It is a beer made from honey. Okay? So consider this. It has basically 3 ingredients: water, honey, and yeast. The yeast ferments the honey, which creates alcohol, because every molecule of yeast that eats a molecule of sugar releases a molecule of carbon dioxide and a molecule of ethanol. Carbon dioxide escapes, the ethanol stays in the water, you have mead. Picture 30 burly men after a battle sitting down and drinking mead. This dude is a wrecker of mead benches. That could mean many things. On one level, it could mean he could pick them up and break them over his leg. It could mean that he would overturn the table and get into a massive bar fight. Okay? He is a rampager among foes. He's intense. Okay? He's not just a good king. This is a classic understatement. And throughout Beowulf, these understatements are used time and time again. And it's actually one of the 3 main literary devices we're going to talk about when we talk about Beowulf. But I want you to listen to this one more time. Same exact thing. And this time, see if as he says it, you can hear the pronunciation in your mind as you follow along.
What? Wegar dena in Yrdagum, Ferod Kuninga, Thrimja Frunan, Hutha Athlingas, Ellen Fremedan. Off shield chafing, Shiadana Triatum, Modigum Maitum, Medo Sedla Oftech. Exo de Erla Sitan Erest Werth, Veasjaft Funden, Hitas Frofra Jebed, Werbs under wolknem, weird mundum thach, off at him I whilch sitendra, over ron rada, huran shoulder, gomban guldan, that was God cunning.